This kind of things that corrupt the will of soldiers and affect the style of the army can't be placed in our military academy. That's the cradle of justice. Kong took another swig of strong alcohol, his expression serious. Then his face turned to Zephyr Nunu's mouth and glanced at the bottomed thermos cup in his hand. Zephyr knew that it would be like this before, chuckled and shook his head, and lifted the jug to fill it up again. The old man Kong doesn't have much hobbies in his life. He doesn't gamble or smoke, just like this wine. Kong raised his head and took a sip, with a sigh of relief. A hump gradually appeared on his cheeks, but his eyes were staring sharply at Zephyr in front of him, and he suddenly narrowly said with a narrow smile. Zephyr, you kid has never been to my marshal's mansion since you became the chief instructor of the military academy. What's the matter with the old man who came here today? Zephyr laughed and said, What's wrong, old man empty, can't you come to visit you if you were okay? Kong is to some extent the teacher of Zephyr, Garp and Sengoku, and even the boss who led them to grow up. The relationship between the two cannot be said to be bad. Vacillating. Zephyr, this old slippery head. Doing nothing without going up to the Three Treasures Palace. This bastard looked like an Iron Man, but in fact he was still very shrewd. But, Kong knows very well that what happened back then hit Zephyr a lot. His wife and children were brutally killed by pirates, and even the place where the incident occurred was inside the heavily guarded Naval Headquarters Marineford. As Marine Marshal Kong, he could not shirk the blame. I owe Zephyr an explanation, but the latter never asked himself for this explanation. Over the years, Zephyr has gradually retired from Marine Admiral's authority, retaining only the rank of Admiral. He is obsessed with the training of military academies, and has cultivated outstanding Marine officers for the department. After all, I owed him a lot. Kong took a sip of the wine, only to feel that the wine was not so fragrant. The pungent acridity continued to irritate his throat. Let's talk about it. Zephyr, come here this time. What on earth are you for? Kong slowly put down the thermos in his hand, looked at Zephyr sternly, and asked in a deep voice. Zephyr gradually put away the smile on his face, and said seriously. Marshal Kong, did you know what happened in the military school yesterday? Nodded empty, disapprovingly said, Isn't it just a classroom accident? The old man was a little surprised. I didn't expect Gion's strength to reach this level. He sighed. Momoshage became the Naval Headquarters Vice Admiral after the opening of the era of the Great Pirates. After that, Naval Headquarters didn't officially face a decent war, and Momoshage naturally didn't have too many opportunities to make a full shot. Zephyr shook his head and said, No, it's not just an ordinary classroom accident. Oh? Kong frowned. Isn't it a class accident? Zephyr suddenly sighed. That was the first swordsmanship class for freshmen in the military academy. According to the normal teaching schedule, in the first swordsmanship class, Gion, as a swordsman instructor, should show the new students the power of swordsmanship. And select some students who have the talent and ability of swordsmanship from the freshmen to carry out special training of swordsmanship. However, this part of the demonstration of the power of swordsmanship may be due to the old man. Gion chose a new student as her practice target. At this point, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of Zephyr's mouth. Kong frowned. Is that the self-disciplined little guy? Zephyr nodded with a wry smile. Kong shook his head. But what's the problem? Zephyr scratched his head and said. There was a problem during the show. Roy and Momoshage fought. Because of the accident, in the end Gion couldn't help but burst out with a full sword. Kong raised his eyebrows. Impossible. Roy is just a freshman in the military academy. How could it be possible to force Gion to use all his strength? Zephyr smiled bitterly, didn't know how to explain, just took a report from his arms and handed it to Kong. I took it and quickly flipped through it, but the more I watched, the more frequently I frowned. This. One of the 6 shaves, and this kind of reaction speed. Finally hit Gion? He looked up at Zephyr. Aren't you fooling the old man? Zephyr said helplessly. Roy is now lying in the hospital of the military academy. I visited him just now. Sora fell silent immediately. At a certain moment, he spoke. So Zephyr, if you come this time, if I guess right, it's for the kid again, right? Zephyr said frankly. Yes, Marshal Sora, I think Roy has the potential to become Admiral, and I hope to include him in the highest level training sequence. Impossible. Zephyr hadn't finished speaking, but Sora waved his hand to refuse. You know better than me what the highest level of training sequence really means. That level of training intensity, teaching speed, and actual combat tasks. That kid is impossible. The highest training sequence of the military academy is a top-secret training program. This is an independent training mechanism set up within naval headquarters for those talents with admiral-level combat potential and talent. To some extent, it is very similar to the training of CP0 members of the world government. CP0 is the highest secret cipher pole directly under the world government. It is the upper level from CP1 to CP9. The full name of the organization is Cypherpole Igus 0. Among them, there are many top powerhouses in the world known as the strongest shield of celestial dragons. The cultivation mechanism of CP0 has always been a huge mystery in the outside world, full of various dark sides. But in fact, this is an independent military organization set up by the world government outside the naval headquarters to ensure the world government's dominance on this sea. And the cultivation mechanism of Celestial Dragon's strongest shield is extremely cruel. CP0 officials will search for children with strong talents from all over the world, instill terrifying iron-blooded thoughts from an early age and give cruel combat, so that these talented children can be promoted in the most cruel way in a very short time, up to admiral-level combat power. The highest training sequence of naval headquarters is also based on the training mode of CP0. The training method, teaching speed and actual combat are still cruel and difficult, but the method is not so inhumane. And as far as Zephyr knows, the last group of members who were included in the highest training sequence of the military academy headquarters were Sakazuki, Kuzan, Peluzalino, Gion, and Cha Dolphin. The final training results are also quite impressive and effective. These 5 people, without exception, have become one of naval headquarters' strongest combat power, and they all have admiral-level strength. Certainly, what Zephyr knows more clearly is that in addition to these 5 people, there are still many people in the same session, and they were completely eliminated in the end. And this kind of elimination often means death in actual combat missions. The army is cruel, even the so-called righteous Marine. The survival of the fittest exists in every era and in every world. In Kong's eyes, Roy's performance in this swordsmanship demonstration is not unbelievable, but it is far from reaching the level of selection as the highest training sequence. There is only one reason: his talent is still far behind Akainu and the others. Let him enter this highest training sequence hastily, and finally meet his ending, it will only be death. Looking at Zephyr with a stunned face in front of him, Kong sighed and said softly, "Zephyr, the old man knows that you value this kid Roy very much. To be honest, I also have some expectations for him. After all, in this era, there are not many little ghosts like him. But one thing you have to understand is that not everyone can break through the limits of talent and finally soar into the sky. Marine from the same era as you, Garp, and Sengoku, how many people desperately want to become stronger? But in the end, you are the only one who can stand at the highest end and break through the limits of talent. It's a success, Marine Admiral, it's all piled up with human lives. Since you value that kid so much, you must have seen you in him. But what if something goes wrong in the end?" Having said this, Sora just looked at Zephyr with a calm look, and didn't say any more. To be honest, he admired Roy, but it was more about Zephyr's face. Sora didn't really care too much about Roy's life and death. But what he is afraid of is, Zephyr put so much energy and effort into Roy, this young Marine. If in the end the kid dies on the road to becoming stronger, what heavy blow will Zephyr endure? The tragedy of that year has made Zephyr frustrated with the life of the army. If it weren't for his own efforts to stay, it is estimated that Zephyr would have already retired from the forest and would never come out of the world again. "He won't die," Zephyr said suddenly. Kong suddenly stunned. Because he actually saw the corner of Zephyr's mouth, he actually showed a confident smile. Zephyr slowly raised his head, staring solemnly at his long-standing boss in front of him. "Marshal Kong, even if he is dead, neither he nor me will have the slightest complaint or regret. He has a mortal consciousness. Even if you die, you must die on the road to becoming stronger. You can see this battle report clearly. That brat Roy, I wouldn't have done that. This is just an ordinary swordsmanship lesson practice, not a life and death fight. But he still did it, even if he was bruised, he wanted to see the gap with Admiral with his own eyes. If life ends here, do you have no regrets? That's what he told me." Zephyr laughed more and more wanton, not knowing whether it was because of the drunkenness or something else. His eyes were glistening. Whether to become a pile of dust and dry bones, or to succeed Admiral, this is the path of his own choice. And the old man, I just want to seek an opportunity for him. Seek an opportunity. Yes, it's that simple. A touch of emotion flashed across Zephyr's reddish eyes. That stinky boy never needs to let others make decisions for him, he has already decided the way he wants to go. As for whether he died mediocrely on this long and difficult road, or finally stood on the top of the 10,000 mountains, even Zephyr didn't know. What Zephyr pays himself to do is to create enough opportunities for him and satisfy all the conditions that might make him stronger, and even hesitate to pull off his old face and come to the sad place of the military again. Marshal Sora begged. Please, Marshal Sora. Zephyr suddenly bent down deeply and bowed towards Kong. Kong was silent. It's crazy. Not only Roy, but Zephyr in front of him, are crazy. At this moment, there was a sudden rush of knocks outside the door of the marshal's office. Tuck tuck tuck, report empty marshal. The head of the military medical department of the military academy is here. Say something urgent. Kong Wei was taken aback for a moment, subconsciously Kaido. Let him in. The door was pushed open. A middle-aged officer in a white coat rushed in hurriedly, panting for a military salute to Kong, and then tremblingly to Zephyr. Zephyr Admiral. That. Roy started again. His voice was terrified, even a kind of horror like seeing a ghost. What started again? Make it clear. Kong frowned and said solemnly. Zephyr's face changed drastically, and an uneasy thought suddenly flashed in his heart. At this time, the officer of the military medical department was out of breath and said. Roy ignored the obstruction of the nurses, and went to the school to train on his own. The voice just fell. Both Zephyr and Sora stared at once and took a breath. That kid died again. Doesn't he know how bad his physical condition is? Asshole. Kong slapped the table heavily, and said furiously. Zephyr sighed with a wry smile. The old man, go and see for yourself. As he said, he raised his head and said solemnly towards Kong. Marshal Kong, I was serious about the matter just now, please consider it seriously. Kong groaned, then suddenly said, I'll go see that kid with you. Zephyr was overjoyed when he heard this. Although Marshal Sora did not make an official statement, he offered to see Roy, which is enough to show that it is a positive sign. Military Academy, the yellow sand is billowing, and the heat waves are surging into the sky. A thin figure is sitting push-ups with one hand on the hot ground. Drops of sweat slid down his cheeks, and was finally absorbed by the dry soil. The open space next to him was piled up with discarded medical bandages and plaster. By the way, are you sure I can do this? Don't break my own body, right? Roy, sweating like rain, gritted his teeth while feeling the soreness of a torn muscle while doing push-ups with one hand. A systematic answer came from deep in the brain. Don't worry. Your body's ability to recover is pretty good. Slight fractures will not affect too much. On the contrary, proper exercise and training will speed up blood circulation and bone healing. Upon hearing the system's words, Roy subconsciously flipped a Byakugan. Is this suitable for sports and training? This kind of intensity can catch up with the extra training when there was no injury before. Sure enough, the system is a big pig's hoof, absolutely can't believe it. But then again, although the burden on the body is heavy and the feeling of exhaustion is still heavy, but after starting the training, the pain that is gushing out of my body has indeed eased a lot. 878, 879, 810. The numbers increased one by one, and Roy's breathing became heavier and dry. Time passed by 1 minute after another, at a certain moment. The sound of the system resounded abruptly again. It's almost time. Roy was taken aback. When? System. When I first practiced 8 inner gates. What? Are you kidding me? Roy was completely stunned now. He didn't adjust his breathing, his whole body softened, and he lay down on the ground in a dog-eating posture, chewing on the dirt. Are you sure it is now? Roy gritted his teeth and spit out the mud hurriedly. System. It's right now. 8 inner gates is essentially a forbidden technique that stimulates the limits of the body by controlling body energy. This also means that you must be on the edge of your body to be able to break through better and easier. Especially the first time. This is equivalent to having a door lying in front of you. You have to wait until the door is about to collapse before you have the greatest chance to push it open. You who are injured now are a good time, a chance. If Roy before crossing is a person who voluntarily gave up all opportunities. So now I have experienced so many Roy, he has completely changed his appearance and has become a person who wants to seize any opportunity. Even if it is very slim, even if it is very far away. In that case, he hurriedly turned a carp to stand up from the ground, raised his hand to wipe the dust from the corner of his mouth, and slowly closed his eyes. The dull voice of the system kept coming out of my mind. Whether it is chakra or haki, it is a manifestation of the human body using energy. All cultivation systems and exercises are essentially the conversion and release of energy, and there is not much difference. The difference is that some cultivation systems have relatively lower energy conversion efficiency, so they are not excellent. The 8 inner gates is just the opposite. The main effect of this training system is not to release and transform human energy, but to use the limited energy in the human body to stimulate physical skills, so as to achieve the horrible effect of leapfrogging and enhancing combat power. The key to the successful practice of this forbidden technique is that the premise of using 8 inner gates is supernormal, overloaded, and long-term training beyond the limit. In this way, all parts and organs of the body can be exercised to adapt to the load they bear after opening, and to minimize the damage to the body by the huge energy after opening. Your body has gone through a series of strengthening and training before, and it has reached the basic conditions for opening the 8 inner gates, and the strength of your body has far surpassed those in the original world of this forbidden technique. In other words, the better your physical fitness and the stronger your basic training, the more terrifying the increase in combat power and bonuses you will bring after opening 8 inner gates. In other words, as long as you successfully open the 8 inner gates, the combat power bonus you get will far surpass that of Rock Lee and even Mike Guy in the same period. But because of this, your body's shackles are too large, and the conditions for you to turn on 8 inner gates are more difficult. Let's start. The opening of the first door of 8 inner gates completely opens the limits of the brain within the human body, and completely liberates your body's potential. Roy nodded, clenching his teeth. He began to search. Look for the meridians and acupoints hidden in the body. Look for the door handle that can completely open the door to reincarnation. The hot wind whizzed across the ground, blowing sand and dust, blowing military uniforms flying. Roy's figure is like a tough rock, standing in the wind and sand in the sky. His breathing gradually changed from rapid to smooth. In the depths of a dark and chaotic brain, he seemed to be able to see light everywhere, igniting light in his body. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, like 8 bright and magnificent stars, shining within their weak body. Found it, Roy whispered softly, and his mind quickly locked on the star in his brain. Open the door. Very well, you have successfully made the first step and found the first door, open door, in 8 inner gates. Now, start to urge the energy in your body to impact that position. You have long been accustomed to fighting and training on the extreme edge of your body, struggling with countless collapses in the past. Now is the time for your new life. Find it, open it, break it. You can break the shackles of this talent, break the restrictions of this rule, and then soar into the sky. I don't know if it is an illusion, the indifferent voice of the system actually carries a hint of excitement and expectation. Then, the torrent began to surge. At first it was a stream of wan, and then countless streams flowed through the meridians of the body, quickly condensed and swelled, and finally merged into a magnificent torrent. At the same time, on the earth, Roy's body actually trembled slightly. The tremor became more and more obvious and more intense, as if every muscle was suffering boundlessly. At a certain moment, Roy snorted, his figure shook, and a dazzling blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. But he seemed to be totally unaware, just gritted his teeth. Started the impact on that level in the body. The mighty torrent turned into a roaring Milky Way, and slammed into the gate fiercely. Boom. Snapped. Suddenly the wound on his chest exploded suddenly, splashing countless blood all over the ground. Pain, heart-wrenching pain, flooded into the brain. No. Another shock. Boom. Or not. Come again. Boom. What is he doing? On the edge of the school, Zephyr and Sora, who had just arrived, were staring at Roy, who was covered in blood, with an unspeakable shock in their hearts. The young figure with eyes closed tightly, the boy who was gritted his teeth and was covered with blood. The old guys like Sora and Zephyr, who have seen countless winds and waves, felt fear and shock from the bottom of their hearts. He is practicing a forbidden technique that breaks through the limits of the body? Marshal Kong opened his mouth, dull and honest. Zephyr also had a dull face and nodded subconsciously, but couldn't say a word. With their eyesight and cultivation experience, even without the perception of observation hockey, they can clearly see how terrible Roy's body is at this moment. It looks like his injury hasn't healed yet. Kong suddenly frowned, as if thinking of something, said in a deep voice. Zephyr nodded with red eyes. Yeah. There were slight bone cracks in at least 8 bones above and below the whole body. The sword mark on the chest was even just scabbed, and his body has not recovered at all. The most important is, Zephyr paused, and said with difficulty. The most serious injury of that brat is not the skin injuries, but his body muscles and organs, which have been slightly depleted after that battle. It's simply not possible to recover in such a short time. As he spoke, he was silent, and his eyes became more red. He didn't expect Roy, this guy, to be so unreliable. Brat, I know you are desperate to become stronger now, but it's not so nonsense. Kong shook his head and said, he is looking for death, Zephyr. Having said that, in his eyes when he looked at Roy, there was gradually a trace of admiration that never existed in the past. An admiration. Yes, admire. It is hard to imagine that this kind of emotion would appear in characters like Marine Marshal Kong. No matter how stupid Roy's actions seem to him. But at least, to the extent of Roy, it takes great courage and determination. And such courage and determination are enough to make anyone moved by it. At this moment snapped. A crisp sound resembling a torn rubber band suddenly came from the boy's body, causing both Zephyr and Sora, who had fallen silent, to suddenly change their faces. They suddenly looked up. Roy let out a muffled noise, and a muscle on his right arm suddenly exploded a bright blood flower. No. His body can't stand this kind of power. He is on the verge of collapse. This is a manifestation of nerves unable to control body muscles. Kong let out a low cry, his pupils constricted into thin needles. Immediately after happiness, like the continuous sound of firecrackers exploding, Roy showed signs of muscle tears all over his body. From a distance, it was as if the surface of his body was exploded by countless explosives at the same time, and the blood that floated out even made the air around his body dyed a hazy red. An extremely shocking scene. Zephyr, Kong shouted loudly. Before his voice fell completely, Zephyr's figure rushed out like a tiger. Isn't it okay? Am I really unable to break through this door? The unbearable pain came from all over the body, making Roy almost let out a sharp scream. But he couldn't care about the pain anymore. In his mind, I can only see that torrent of water as like a lacing wave, constantly hitting the door in the brain. It's getting looser. The door was obviously shaky, but it still didn't open. Work harder, and you will succeed immediately. It is absolutely impossible to give up now, otherwise the next time it hits, the difficulty will be countless times harder than this time. The sound of the system rang in his ears, making Roy even more irritable. I know, he suddenly roared. At this moment, an inexplicable sense of crisis is pouring toward me like moving a mountain and reclaiming the sea. Who is it? Roy can feel that a strong, even out of reach, strong is approaching him, but at such a critical moment. Go away. Roy let out a roar in the bottom of his horse, and exhausted his whole body's strength to push the torrent towards his brain. Boom. Next moment, the world before me becomes clear. The light has never been so bright, and even more weird. Everything around is slowing strangely at an astonishing speed. That feeling, it's as if the passage of time has slowed down. It's not that time has slowed down. But his perception and speed have become stronger. Whoosh. His figure disappeared in place. Zephyr was rushing for a moment, then turned and raised his arm subconsciously. Boom. A bloody fist hit his arm hard. Strong wind. Yellow Sandman, a young blood-stained figure, laughed wantonly. 8 inner gates, the first door, open the door, liberate. Boom. The violent power burst from his fists, and the hot yellow sand agitated behind him. This moment, both Zephyr and Sora's eyes widened suddenly, and there was a shocking emotion in their hearts. This power. His body. In the distance of the schoolyard, Marshal Kong stared solemnly at the blood-stained young man who was laughing presumptuously and cheerfully. He was moved for a while, and his eyes were slightly tranced. He succeeded. Break through the shackles of the body and get rid of the limitations of talent. Time seems to stop at this moment, from the perspective of emptiness. In the setting sun, on a red fire background, the two figures, the old and the young, are shaking their fists against each other. Stirring with strong winds and yellow sand, it's like a beautiful and passionate silhouette. Roy, is this your consciousness? You really opened my eyes to the old man. Sora suddenly laughed in relief, sighed and murmured softly. At this moment, at least for this moment, he started to understand why Zephyr's stubborn boy was so optimistic about this young marine recruit. Because he really never gave up. Even if life has never been kind to him, even if fate has never been fair to him. Can withstand the pain that the body is almost torn, and finally regenerate as if coming out of a cocoon. Isn't it the youth that everyone looks up to the most in their lives? The smile on the corner of the empty mouth became stronger, and the mood gradually became agitated. With slightly startled eyes, the rays of the setting sun shone diagonally on the laughing young man, as if covering him with a bloody brilliance. Be a hero to life, because you are chasing dreams full of light. Marine Admiral. Sora muttered to himself, and dim light gradually appeared in the old eyes. Then try it, funny kid. Don't blame the old man if you die. This is the path of your own choice. But, boy, your persistence has indeed moved the old man. I have never felt that everything in front of me is so clear. I have never discovered that everything in front of me is so slow. That feeling, there seemed to be a way of holding everything in the hands of the master. Although the pain of the body is still continuing, it is not worth mentioning compared to the invigoration and pleasure brought about by the new feelings of the body. Fangsha passed in front of him, slapping his dry cheeks. Boy, you are really messy. At this time, a familiar voice sounded in front of him. Roy was taken aback, and hurriedly closed his fists. The wind blows away the yellow sand, and a face full of relief comes into view. The purple hair is full but mighty, and the broad shoulders are as firm as a mountain. Teacher Zephyr? Zephyr also put his hands away, and looked at Roy's body up and down with doubts in his eyes for a long time. He looked straight at Roy's heart and mumbled. I really don't understand how your little devil's body structure can endure such pain. Are your nerves beaten by iron? Roy chuckled and let out a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, the clue was not seen. He grinned and said, well, the nerves are thicker, so I'm not afraid of pain. Aren't you afraid of pain? An unknown distress flashed deep in Zephyr's eyes. How could someone not be afraid of the pain, brat? Just weak, humble and weak, it is far more tormenting than physical pain. Seeing the blood-stained childish face in front of him, Zephyr couldn't help sighing in his heart. Damn. You speak lightly on your face, but no one knows how many times you have clenched your teeth behind your back. You walk with wind and laugh wantonly, but no one knows that you have bruises from a fall on your knees. This is the way of ordinary people, not as flat and expansive as genius. It is full of ups and downs and crises. Whenever I think of it, it is always sad. Looking at what you were just now, are you trying to break through the limits of your body? Zephyr tried to press down on the complex emotions in his heart, was silent for a while before slowly asking. Roy smiled and nodded. Yes, Teacher Zephyr. Zephyr laughed. Looking at your punch just now, and the speed of the shave, I guess it was a success, right? Roy's punch just now, whether in strength or explosiveness, far exceeded his previous level. And the shave speed of this one of Marine 6 styles, from the original 40 times stepping on the ground every moment, suddenly soared to 60 times per second. This speed of improvement is enough to shock any Type 6 master. Shaving is a high-speed moving technique. It takes dozens of continuous high-speed steps on the ground within 1 second to produce explosive reaction forces to create an effect similar to teleport. The more times you step on the ground instantly, the faster you shave. Shaving is an extremely effective and highly adaptable movement technique both in attack and retreat in actual combat. The most important is, this kind of high-speed movement technique has no upper limit in practice. In other words, the more proficient you are with the master who shaves, the stronger your physical fitness and nerve response will be, and the more times you will step on the ground in an instant, the more terrifying the final effect created by the shaving. The speed, distance, position, direction, and flexibility of high-speed movement can all be improved without restriction. As long as your body can bear it. This also means that the same as the shave of Marine 6 styles, showed by Zephyr, a 6-type supermaster, and an ordinary Marine Vice Admiral, the effect on the battlefield can be worlds apart. Of course, the most important thing is that a perfect shave, in addition to the strength of your physical fitness, is your control of your body. It is the ability of the brain to control the body. Zephyr has seen Roy perform shave for the first time in a swordsmanship class. At that time, Roy, when performing shaving, was extremely clumsy and immature in both the technique and the control of the body, and could only barely grasp the threshold of shaving. But now, from the teleport speed just now, Zephyr can easily see that Roy's control of the body has far surpassed that of the previous swordsmanship class when he performed the shave. Great progress, but, this brat. Zephyr shook his head, and looked at Roy's indifferent smile toward his hippie face in front of him. His heart couldn't get angry. By the way, do you think your body is beaten with iron? Is the injury still good? He angered. Roy smiled. It's okay, old man. I don't want to have been lying in the ward for a long time, and I have been bored for too long. Want to come out and exercise? Zephyr suddenly became angry. Are you exercising? You are almost dying of yourself. Seeing Roy's open wound on his chest and his body dripping with blood, he became even more angry and couldn't help but yelled. Don't talk so much nonsense. Hurry up and get the old man back to the hospital. If the old man finds you sneaking out for training within 3 days, the old man will break your leg." Roy smiled and nodded. He has successfully opened the first gate of 8 inner gates, and he really needs a good rest. Unexpectedly, just after nodding, his face turned white suddenly. I rolled my eyes. He fell straight back in Zephyr's bewildered eyes. "Zephyr. This just said so well. How can you say that you were dizzy?" "Military doctor. Military doctor. Security guard. Security guard. Get out for the old man. What's the matter with the old man's students? The old man will dismiss you all." Zephyr growled in panic. Okay, stop yelling, it's no use calling the security guard." Sora's figure appeared next to Zephyr and turned Byakugan angrily. "Also dismissed and investigated, who gave you this right? I can only blame you, the student, for being crazy." Kong shook his head and smiled bitterly. Zephyr really cares and messes. "They also called for security. Where is the security guard in the military department? He just fainted because of physical exhaustion and fatigue. Let's sew up the wound and make a bottle to replenish nutrition and it will be fine." Zephyr let out a long breath, staring at Roy who was sleeping on the ground. The joy and admiration in the depths of his eyes were undisguised, and finally he even laughed happily. "Ha ha ha ha. Have you seen it? Empty old man, are the students chosen by the old man fierce?" The limitation of the human body was abruptly broken by him. "Now you have to agree to my suggestion, right?" Marshal Sora's mouth twitched and he looked at the old bastard who was still winking at him at his age with a speechless face, and said helplessly, "It's all right, do what you want. But don't ask an old man to play favors. There will still be actual combat missions. When the time comes, this kid is dead, don't come back and cry for the old man." Zephyr laughed and patted Sora's shoulder vigorously, and said with a big grin, "Don't worry. I have confidence in this kid. Soon this guy will be able to catch up with Sakazuki and the 3 incompetent guys. Ha 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 ha." Sora covered his forehead. "These 205. Roy wants to catch up with Sakazuki and the 3 of them. It's too early. Monster-level talent. Even if it is empty, every time I think of the 3 of them, a chill of scalp tingling flows in my heart." But, seeing the light of hope and expectation in Zephyr's eyes before him, he is also very happy for Zephyr. This old boy hasn't been so happy for a long time since that incident. Sora's eyes finally fell on Roy. Such a thought flashed in my mind. "Little devil, before you know it, your opponent is no longer a freshman in the military academy. Are you afraid?" The picture in front of me gradually became clear. It's the familiar gray walls, the familiar ceiling fan, the familiar hanging bottle, and the familiar pain from all over the body. This is the ward, so it looks like the original room. Lying down again. Roy's mouth couldn't help showing a bitter smile, and he whispered in a hoarse voice. But his eyes flashed with determination and enthusiasm. After all, he succeeded. The liberation of 8 inner gates first, door opening, means that he has successfully opened the shackles of his talent in combat power. He may be weak now, but Roy believes that his future is a smooth road. Congratulations for successfully opening the first door of 8 inner gates. There is still a long way to go, but at least, you now have the qualifications and confidence to compete with that group of monsters in the future. The voice of the system sounded in his mind. Although the tone was still so calm and indifferent, Roy could hear excitement and pride in his voice. Roy smiled and clenched his fists subconsciously. There was still unbearable pain in his muscles, but he didn't care. I really got stronger. He can clearly feel how strong he is after opening the first gate of 8 inner gates. This kind of power is not in absolute sense. Facing the Admiral-class combat power is still the level of being killed by a spike. This is a powerful mentality. After opening the first door of the 8 inner gates, his insensitivity and control over his body gradually became perfect. The kind of freewheeling pleasure that he could not understand and imagine before. "It seems you feel it too." The sound of the system came out of my ears at this time. 8 inner gates is an extremely magical training system, and although the opening of the first gate does not increase the overall combat power as much as the other gates, it is the most important one. Roy paused. "Oh? You mean, the first open door is the most important foundation? System?" "Yes, as I said before, 8 inner gates is a training system that uses body energy to stimulate the limits of the human body and maximize combat power. But have you ever thought that the most powerful fighting organ of the human body is not actually your hands and feet? It's your brain?" Roy frowned. This was the first time he heard such a view. According to what online novels and powerful attacks and weapons he saw on Earth, shouldn't they be artifacts or energy balls? The system continues to explain without hurries. The strength of combat power is, in the final analysis, the strength of the human body. If measured by energy level, the greater the energy contained in the human body, the stronger its combat power should be. At least according to normal logic. Roy nodded. It was easy to understand. The system continued. But in fact, not everyone can maximize the hidden power in the body. Because every action of the human body in battle, every attack and defense, every dodge, and even every energy output, requires the control of the brain. Without the control of the brain, no matter how great your power is, it is just an untimely bomb. Roy suddenly realized. System Road, and the open door, of the first gate of the 8 inner gates is located in the human brain. After this door is opened, your brain area will be completely lifted, allowing you to exert 100% of your body's abilities. Believe this, after the previous scene on the school field, you have already experienced it quite clearly, right? Recalling the invigorating feeling on the school field in his heart, Roy's face Jonan couldn't help but a smile appeared. Whether it is the control of body movements and posture, or the mobilization of muscles, it is presented in front of oneself like a clear picture. That feeling is something I have never experienced before. For this reason, he was able to display one of the Marine 6 styles, shave, with a more perfect posture, and move at a higher speed. The opening of the open door, and the liberation of the brain did not actually improve one's speed and strength, and even made little change in physical fitness, but it allowed one to make the best use of one's body and become a complete one. Fighter aircraft. All movements are extremely smooth, all muscles are like arm wrestlers. In this way, the combat power presented at the end is quite different. It's just that there is another problem. Exhaustion of physical strength. Roy frowned subconsciously. Yes, after opening the door, although one's own combat power can be greatly improved, the burden on the body and the consumption of physical strength will also become extraordinarily terrifying. 100% of the nerve control of physical skills means that the body's energy is consumed extremely heavy or even overloaded. This squeezing of physical strength is simply an astronomical number. Even if Roy has now undergone hell-style training in military academies and systems, it is estimated that it will be difficult for him to keep the first door of 8 inner gates open for a long time. Physical exhaustion is indeed a problem, but you don't need to worry too much. The system said slowly at this time. With the strengthening of your training, the improvement of physical fitness and the enhancement of physical endurance, you will be able to keep the first door open for a long time. In addition to this method, as long as you successfully open the second gate of the 8 inner gates, you will be able to fully contact the body's fatigue limit, overload and squeeze the body energy to restore physical strength, and offset the energy consumption speed band of opening the door. The fatigue that comes. Roy nodded. In other words, is the best solution to further exercise your body to become stronger? System Road. Yes, whether it is the liberation of the restrictions of the 8 inner gates or the reduction of the physical sequelae caused by the opening of the 8 inner gates, you need to continuously strengthen your physical fitness. So, this is the most suitable exercise for you. Yo. Why does this always sound like a triumphant feeling? You mean, this is the best practice method for you, right? Roy flipped a Byakugan, curled his lips. To put it nicely is to open 8 inner gates more, in fact it is to let me continue to train like crazy. Isn't this F***king what your self-discipline system wants to do? I suspect you did it on purpose. A special 8 inner gates, revised, came out, so that you can use the name of self-discipline to torture me with one more fair reason, right? Of course, the system noticed Roy's inner Shao Juju, and his flat voice sounded in his mind. Don't think too much. Well, it's just a coincidence. This 8 inner gates, reform, is indeed the best practice system for you. To be honest, your talent is really not good. If you want to compete with those monsters on the basis of such a talent, and even defeat them, only 8 inner gates can do it. For other techniques, your talent is not at all able to practice. The corners of Roy's mouth twitched slowly. The truth is cruel, I know, but can't you be so direct? Can't you be so tactful and take care of my self-esteem? However, what is going on with talent? Roy suddenly remembered something and asked. The speed of my combat power improvement is not too slow, to be honest. Is my talent really so bad? The system's answer is desperate. Well, it's not bad among ordinary people, it's just not related to geniuses. Talent is a general term for comprehension ability, imitative ability, learning ability and adaptability, etc. It is also a measure of the speed of improvement of basic physical quality. To explain it in a way that is easier to understand, that is, if the talent of ordinary people is 1, the genius is 10. It takes 10 days for ordinary people to learn skills, and geniuses only take 1 day or less. This is even more obvious in physical performance. For example, if someone trains for a month, the strength and dimensionality of the muscles can be doubled, but you need a year or even longer. In the long run, the gap between ordinary people and geniuses will grow further and further. The 3 of Akainu are called monsters. According to my estimation, their talents are at least dozens or even hundreds of times that of ordinary people. That is to say, you are 1 and they are 100. And the reason why your combat power and physical fitness can be improved at a reasonable speed is that under the reasonable torture of this system, oh no, under reasonable training, keeping your body on the edge of the limit can completely squeeze your potential to speed up your cultivation progress. Of course, there is another aspect of talent, and that is capacity. For example, the energy capacity of genius is a bottle of Sabon, while your capacity is just a bottle of can. But this does not mean that the energy burst from the can will necessarily be low. Roy suddenly said, like pressure, System Kaido. That's right, increasing the pressure, even the amount of water at the level of a can, can also cause the horrible force of tearing steel. 8 Inner Gates practice design is essentially like this. Let you be able to explode to the greatest extent the destructive power that exceeds your own limit by dozens of times with your limited aptitude and talent. That's it. Now Roy understood it thoroughly. Talent cannot be changed, this is innate. Even the system is powerless. But this does not mean that he has no way out. Too humble? Then try to stand on tiptoe. Just when Roy was lost in thought, boom. The door of the ward was suddenly blasted open. Roy just felt a flash before his eyes, and a bit of chill suddenly stuck to his throat. If you want to die, I can fulfill you, it doesn't have to be so troublesome. A cold female voice sounded in the empty ward. The sword was only 0.11 centimeters from my throat, but after a quarter of the incense, the mistress of that sword will completely fall in love with me, because I decided to tell a lie. I went to the wrong set. Feeling the icy chill in the throat, and the stern killing intent of the air filled with the smell of disinfectant in the ward, the pores on Roy's body were completely exploded at this moment. That. Momoshagi Vice Admiral, I don't seem to have done anything to offend you, right? A drop of cold sweat slipped on Roy's forehead, and he looked at the charming figure in front of him with a dull expression, making a dry voice. This woman is too irritable. Although I knew in my heart that this irritable lady couldn't cut herself with a sword here, but the terrifying murderous aura exuding from the latter made Roy dare not move. Well, according to normal logic, women should be unreasonable. Momoshagi, who was holding the famous sword Jinburo in his hand, saw Roy's innocent face, and his anger deepened, and a pair of beautiful eyes almost shot out sparks. What did you say? Nothing. Momosagi's face turned red and white with anger, and her chest was astonishingly undulating, which was shocking. Black lines appeared on Roy's forehead. Don't get excited. You are so angry that your hands are shaking. Your sword is holding my throat. Don't shake it, make Xiaoyi's throat shake away. Thinking that there is nothing wrong with this or not to mess with this pervert woman, Roy decisively admits it. That Momoshagi Vice Admiral, no matter what I do, you have to believe that I didn't mean it. His expression was so serious that he almost raised his hand to swear. If I do something that offends you, I apologize to you, okay? Momoshagi suddenly broke out. You don't even know where you were wrong, do you dare to apologize? She almost smashed the silver teeth and shouted angrily. Roy's heart was utterly wronged. This woman is really unreasonable. I apologized. What do you think of me? Naturally, these words cannot be said. He just put a soft smile on his face and said softly. Momoshagi Vice Admiral, no matter what is wrong, I believe I hurt you. But if you kill me, I can't make up for anything. Why don't you put the sword down first, and then we have a good chat? This way at least let me know what I did wrong, so I can make up for you, and make up for the work. Momoshagi gritted his teeth and stared at Roy. His face changed, and finally seemed to have been influenced by the latter's sincere eyes, and with a cold snort, he retracted the sword in his hand into the scabbard. Kang. Roy exhaled in his heart as he watched that sharp and boundless famous knife return to its sheath. The journey of flying into the sky has just begun. Can it die in the hands of a woman? It's so embarrassing to pass through. Seeing Roy's post-mortem look, Momoshagi snorted coldly on his face. Do you still know that you are afraid of death? Roy shrugged and said, Of course I am afraid, who is not afraid of death? Momoshagi gritted his teeth and said, Then why your injury is not healed, and you are so desperately running to the school field for training? She bit her red lip with her teeth, her eyes filled with unresolved grievances. In the swordsmanship class, I had been trained by teacher Zephyr, saying that he almost killed all his precious students. The movement caused by that sword was so great that it even caused a lot of riots in the military. In the end, Marshal Sora and Sengoku Admiral used it to talk to themselves. What I hate most is, in the swordsmanship class that day, I came to my menstrual period, and because of the excessive activity, there were signs again, which made many military school freshmen notice this scene sharply. Freshmen are all 8 trigrams, especially in the military camp. Eye-catching beauties like Momoshagi are the focus of the big master's daily 8 trigrams. Naturally, the news spread throughout the military as if it had grown legs. Ever since, the unknowing teacher Zephyr, Marshal Sora, and Sengoku Admiral, the 3 straight men, all implicitly mentioned that they should go to the military department to see a female doctor to adjust their physical and mental state. Which one is all this and which one? Feelings. They all thought that they were so violent that day that they swung that sword because their aunt came to be irritable and couldn't control her emotions. But she can't explain it at all. Even if she explained this matter, she couldn't explain it clearly. Who would believe that she was careless, and because she was concerned about Roy and other issues, she finally poke out this basket. Originally, Roy had caused a lot of jokes and troubles when he was lying in the hospital, but he didn't expect that Roy would have tossed himself into the hospital again within 2 days. This is not, the rumors have begun again. Now many people in the military think that Roy was so desperate because Momoshagi shot too hard that day and his self-esteem was severely beaten. If he was injured, he started training hard again. Momoshagi is a grievance. After all, he couldn't help but ran to this hospital to find Roy and was unhappy. It's the bastard Roy. Let yourself be so ugly. So now Marshal Kong, Mr. Garp, and Sengoku Admiral all let themselves go to the military hospital to see the hormonal disorder during menstruation. Now almost everyone in the entire military department thinks that they are not only using the strong to bully the weak, but almost killing an excellent freshman in the military academy, causing his self-esteem to be damaged, and he went to the school to train again before he recovered. What a shame. Momoshagi pays that he has lived such a long time. How can he be treated like this? Where have you been so wrong? It's all to blame for this bastard Junior who is still smiling at hippies. You don't know what you are wrong. Momoshagi became more and more angry when he thought about it, and almost couldn't help drawing his sword again. Seeing this little movement, Roy couldn't care about the pain of his body. He gritted his teeth and stood up and pressed Momosagi's hand firmly, with a flattering smile on his face. That Momoshagi Vice Admiral, I really don't know. Why don't you tell me to listen? Maybe after I know it, I will have a way to make up for all this, right? Roy carefully looked at Momosagi's eyes full of frost and killing intent, and secretly said in his heart that this aunt's grandma is really hard to serve. Momosagi's teeth bit her red lip suddenly. How can she say these things? Such a thing is really shameful. How could she tell this kid like Roy? Seeing Momoshagi, the originally brave and heroic superwoman in front of him, looked so wronged, Roy probably guessed the reason behind Momosagi's rage. Chunin couldn't help laughing in his heart, but in the end he still spoke softly. That, Momoshagi Vice Admiral, why don't you sit down and calm down? Momoshagi didn't speak, just scratched Roy's eyes coldly, and then sat down on the chair next to the hospital bed with a cold snort. Roy smiled bitterly, stood up from the hospital bed with difficulty, poured a cup of hot water in the thermos, and gave it to Momoshagi. Drink more hot water, it's good for your health. Momoshagi was taken aback. Looking at the hot water in Roy's hand, her mind suddenly recalled Roy's gentlemanlike and considerate behavior on the school field that day, and her heart warmed. In particular, Roy now looks almost half of his body tied up with blood-stained bandages. It looks as miserable as a beggar turned out of the trash, and it gives people a pitiful feeling. Momoshagi snorted and took the hot water that Roy handed over, and took a sip. The anger in his heart was mostly gone. Roy saw that the murderous aura from Momoshagi gradually dissipated. He firmly lifted the heart and put it down safely. While observing the changes in Momosagi's expression, he carefully sat back on the bedside. The atmosphere in the huge ward became a bit awkward for a while. Momosagi posted it too, and she couldn't really cut this damn bastard with a sword, and she didn't know what to say here. As for Roy, he didn't dare to move, and he didn't even dare to speak. The ghost knew if he would say something wrong, and then once again made this amazing girl in front of him move and kill again? Even if she won't kill herself, can she teach herself that it is not commonplace? Roy didn't want to lie down in the hospital anymore. In just a few days, his courses in the military academy have fallen behind a lot, and he still wants to be discharged as soon as possible to make up for it. Otherwise, the system estimates that it will give itself shock therapy again. Thus, both a man and a woman were silent. The ward became so quiet that the needles fell for a while, which made Roy restless, like sitting on pins and needles. At a certain moment, I heard that you have learned a practice method that breaks the limits of your body? Momoshagi suddenly said such a coldly, but his tone was with a hint of curiosity. Roy admitted frankly, well, yes, some progress. Momoshagi frowned, his eyes couldn't help but look at Roy again. Roy shrank immediately and moved away from Momoshagi in the opposite direction. Momoshagi couldn't help but pouch and laughed. What are you hiding? Do you think I'm really against your opponent? Roy thought that of course, Laozi recognized the murderous aura you had just now. But I can't say this, Roy just smiled bitterly. No, 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 my body is covered with bandages, it's all blood and wounds, it's dirty. Momoshagi watched Roy quietly for a long time, and saw that the latter's heart was hairy, then he sighed and asked in a deep voice. What are you doing so desperately for? Roy's injury was terrible, she saw it clearly. But she really couldn't figure out what was it that made this overly young recruit work hard like this. Do you really want to be Marine Admiral? The last time Roy told Zephyr in this ward, Momoshagi outside the door could hear it clearly. But she really didn't understand. Obviously it is an impossible dream, so why do you have to fight to such a degree? Admiral, it's really impossible to become one with hard work. Only the extremely talented monsters are eligible to be named Admiral. Why can you bridge the desperate gap between talents and become the strongest among our millions of Marines and the highest combat power of our world government? Momoshagi stared at Roy sternly and solemnly, trying to capture the slightest change in his expressions and eyes. Why? Roy laughed suddenly. It's really irritable. Everyone said so. Old Zephyr thinks so, Marshal Sora thinks so too. Momoshagi thinks so too. People they know, even though they say they believe in themselves. But in fact, Roy saw it thoroughly in his heart. Yes, why am I? However, the smile on the corner of his mouth has become more and more intense, become wanton, and become carefree. What are you laughing at? Momoshagi's pretty face was stained with anger. If you continue to not cherish your body like this, you will die. Don't die on such a meaningless thing for the sake of an illusory dream. She looked at Roy's eyes full of hatred for iron and steel. To be honest, Roy's self-discipline, his rigorous training, his efforts, all his efforts, Momoshagi was watching. Especially Roy's considerate behavior in the swordsmanship class made her feel an inexplicable favor with this young student in her heart. She really didn't want to see Roy die because of this unreachable dream in the end. She is distressed. I know it's hard to be an admiral, Momoshagi vice admiral. Roy spoke at this moment. Momoshagi was stunned. Because she saw Roy's face with a brilliant smile, and her eyes shone with dazzling and warm light. Actually, I know better than any of you. Their talent is at least 100 times that of mine, and they each have the rare and destructive devil fruit ability in this sea. The chance that I can catch up with them is infinitely close to zero. But just don't know why, I always think I can. This is stupid, isn't it? But I have such a character, even if I hit the south wall, I won't give up. Roy smiled slightly, softly, but the smile made Momoshagi feel painful. Most importantly, because I want to live. His last words made Momoshagi a little puzzled. Live. Isn't that a very simple thing? But what she doesn't know is that Roy, who is familiar with the plot, knows that although the current naval headquarters is strong, it will not be long before that even if it is as powerful as Marine, it will face tragic failure. The escape of Golden Lion must be brewing an extremely amazing conspiracy and plan. The order of the New World Four Emperors has begun to take shape. Their tentacles have even reached the entrance of the Fishman Island, the New World. Not to mention the future war on the top. The world's strongest man, Whitebeard Edward Newgate. The strongest conquerors Hockey Redhead Shanks. Born Destroyer, Big Mom Charlotte Linlin. The strongest creature in the sea, land and air, Kaido Kaido. In the future, as Marine himself, he will inevitably encounter such an enemy. He can naturally be an administrative officer safely and steadily. The kind who is not on the battlefield, but let Roy live like a living one's life. Does this crossing have any meaning? He will definitely be on the battlefield. On the battlefield, life will never be under your control. Even Vice Admiral, the mainstay of Marine, is the ant that slapped to death in the hands of Whitebeard. Only Admiral. Only Admiral-class combat power can ensure that Roy can survive this sea full of risks and endless crises. Thinking of this, Roy smiled lightly and looked at Momoshiki calmly. Momoshiki Vice Admiral, you ask me why I am so desperate. A genius like you who has everything, of course doesn't understand. I, an ordinary person, really just want to live. Momoshiki was silent. There was a burst of sourness in my heart that I had never seen before. Yes, I have no right to give pointers to the young man in front of him. Because not everyone has the same advantages as themselves. More importantly, this is the life of his own choice. I see. Momoshiki said in a deep voice. She slowly put down the cup of warm water in her hand, turned around and wanted to leave. But at this time, Roy suddenly said another word. Momoshiki Vice Admiral, you just asked me why I became Admiral. A sunny smile appeared on his face, showing white teeth. Let me tell you. Momoshiki's eyes were startled, and he turned to look at the injured young man in front of him. I saw Roy inhale deeply, then exhale a long breath. As if to pour out all the gloom and unwillingness accumulated in the chest in the past few days. He slowly straightened his chest, word by word, shocking words came into Momoshiki's mind. In the morning when others can't get up, I can. Training that others can't stick to, I can. Others don't dare to fight their lives, I can. The pain that others can't bear, I can also. Why do you ask me? There is always someone who wants to win, why can't it be me? In an instant, Momoshiki's face was moved. 3 days later, the hospital ward of the military school. The morning sun was warm and clear, projected from outside the window, and scattered on the clean ground like stars, making it quiet and comfortable. Standing in front of the military mirror, Roy looked calm and moved slowly and earnestly to buckle the buttons of the uniform one by one. Looking at the face in the mirror that seemed to be gradually becoming unfamiliar, a confident smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The world has changed him a lot. He knows many, many people. I have also seen the power that can destroy the country. He has fought and worked hard. All the past and experiences, sweat and blood, unknowingly left traces of years on his young and immature face, making his eyes deeper and his expression calmer. He subconsciously tightened the tie on his collar. What's wrong? It's rare to let you rest for a few days, and now you return to the army, but you are a little panicked? The voice of the system rang in my mind. Roy smiled and said. It's not too panic, it's just a little uncomfortable. In the past few days, in order to completely recover his body, the system rarely allowed him to maintain his daily training. But there is a faint illusion in Roy's heart. Do not know why, self-cultivation in bed. I always feel a sense of doing nothing. Is it true that you are a joke? If you don't be tortured this day, will you feel uncomfortable for a day? He chuckled and shook his head, expelled all the thoughts in his heart, and looked at the time. Almost. Talking, he walked quickly to the door of the ward and pushed it open. The sun poured in, setting off a beautiful silhouette of his body in the picture. It's a new beginning, but this time, I'm not the same anymore. Bring it on, whether it is any opponent or challenge. I'm all ready. There was a sunny smile at the corner of Roy's mouth, and he plunged into the disturbing world of the outside world. Behind him, everything in the ward was cleaned up and spotlessly clean. Naval Headquarters Marineford. Marshal's Mansion. The outside world is sunny, but the atmosphere in the Marshal's office is depressed and depressed. In the deadly air, the solemn breath was endless. Marine Marshal Kong, Garp Vice Admiral, Sengoku Admiral, etc. All the Marine executives sat with a gloomy face, quietly watching the 2-finger-thick piece of information in their hands. It's an eventful season. After a while, Sengoku slowly removed his head from the report in his hand, and subconsciously lifted his glasses. Under the round glasses, his eyes were full of solemnity. The others also shook their heads, but no one spoke. Marines first place, Kong said in a deep voice. Have you finished reading? This time, what do you think? He also held a battle report in his hand, and the front page of the battle report was the most eye-catching photo. The photo is not clear, and even blood-red traces are faintly visible in the lens. It was a pile of dead bodies with no end in sight. Flesh and flesh flying, stumped limbs and broken arms. The rotten flesh and blood looked shocking among the tattered corpses. And underneath the pile of corpses was a barren and dilapidated earth, and there were fierce cracks everywhere. In the blood-red atmosphere, a burly, blood-stained figure stood at the top of the pile of corpses like a demon, smiling upwards. The man had long golden hair, a stern face, and he was wearing a black military uniform. His explosive muscles almost broke through the uniform. Domineering and tyrannical, Douglas Bullet. The nickname, Heir of the Devil, the hero who is called the successor of the Ghost, is a member of the Roger Pirates, and is recognized as a monster. Sengoku's eyebrows seemed to be filled with a black pen forcibly, and they wrinkled into a big chuan. Garp shook his head. Roger, I didn't expect that after you died, your crew once again turned this sea upside down. Crane Vice Admiral raised his head towards Kong and asked in a deep voice. Is the source of this battle report reliable? Nodding empty. This is the news from the spies we planted in New World. Douglas Bullet, after Roger was executed, this madman challenged the major forces of the New World just like crazy. So far, more than 20,000 Marines, more than 20 pirate groups, and 3 small countries have been destroyed by him. Speaking of this, there were blue veins on Marshal Kong's forehead, which showed that he was suppressing his anger firmly. Is he crazy to make enemies everywhere like this? His goal. What exactly is it? Sengoku asked in a deep voice. Kong sighed. Although this is just speculation, we have enough reasons to believe that the target of this lunatic is our Marine. As soon as this remark came out, everyone was in awe. The target of this lunatic turned out to be Marine. The Marine executives present subconsciously wanted to deny and refute. Although Roger successfully started the era of big pirates, the sea became more and more chaotic. But no matter how you say it, the victor of the last era is still Marine, who represents justice. One pirate king named Roger, and the Roger pirate group disbanded. The contemporary legend of the great pirate flying into the sky, the Admiral Golden Lion Shiki, was arrested and imprisoned. Although he has recently successfully pulled out from the impelled-down prison, he has lost his legs and his combat power has been greatly reduced, and he cannot become a big climate. The maritime overlord of the world today is still Marine. Douglas Bullet, no matter how strong he is only alone. But this doesn't seem right. Since this guy's goal is our Marine, how can he make enemies on such a large scale? At this moment, on the corner sofa at the other end of the marshal's office, a slow voice came slowly. Hearing this sound, Sengoku frowned subconsciously. This guy is obviously the highest level military meeting, and he is so silly. The owner of the voice is a black-haired curly uncle, who is wearing a fancy yellow and white striped suit. Even in the room, he wears an exaggerated pair of toed sunglasses. He has his arms around his chest, his expression is funny and casual, as if he doesn't care much about everything. Paluzolino, Marine code named Kizaru, Naval Headquarters Vice Admiral, is known as a monster, the next strong candidate for Admiral. This is a declaration of war, and it is also a declaration of his strength to this sea. There was another low voice on the other end. The deep and hoarse voice revealed a hard breath, but when he opened his mouth, he suddenly felt his murderous aura. He was wearing a flaming red suit, with Erlang's legs tilted, half of his face covered by the shadow of his cap. This is so. The coldness of the exposed half of his face is enough to make people see the toughness of his character. Akainu Sakazuki is also a terrifying monster with terrifying combat power. Empty nodded in agreement. Yes. Compared to Kaido, Charlotte Linlin, and Whitebeard, who were famous in the Roger era, Douglas Bullet, even if he was once a member of Roger's crew, is only a rising star at the age of 22. At this age, it's easy to be looked down upon. And the importance of fame to a pirate, you also know very well. Fame, for a pirate, is equivalent to the meaning of military rank for a Marine. This is a symbol of status and strength, and it is also something that countless pirates have sacrificed their lives for. In particular, this so-called fame is largely due to the rewards offered by Marine and the government. The higher the bounty of a pirate, the higher his reputation, the stronger his strength, and the higher his danger to the world. This is the sadness of this era. To some extent, in order to increase the amount of their rewards, countless people have done some dehumanizing things, causing countless disasters and family destruction. So Douglas Bullet wants to use this method to prove his own strength in front of Whitebeard and other big pirates of the older generation. Garp shook his head, nodding empty. Yes. But this is not the most difficult problem at hand. His face gradually became gloomy, and his tone became more serious than ever. If it's just Douglas Bullet alone, it wouldn't be an urgent call for you to come over for this meeting. Our spy organization intercepted a phone worm signal half an hour ago. There was a pause, as if the appropriate wording was brewing, and the panic in his heart was suppressed. Golden Lion Shiki, who has just escaped from Impelton Grand Prison, is preparing to come into contact with Douglas Bullet, who is making trouble in the New World. Marshal Kong's words were not very loud, but when they fell in this quiet office, it exploded like thunder, blasting the brains of everyone present. There was a brief silence at first. What? Sengoku suddenly stood up from his seat, his face changed greatly and exclaimed. The expressions of other people can't see where they go, and they are complicated and changeable. Unlike Douglas Bullet, who likes to be alone, the Flying Admiral, Golden Lion Shiki, in the eyes of naval headquarters, is dangerous at the level of nuclear bombs. No matter how strong Bullet is, he is just a person. But Golden Lion Shiki, that was the captain of the world's largest pirate fleet in the New World Master in the Roger era. Admiral. This is his title. At that time, naval headquarters had organized large-scale troops to fight against the fleet he led many times, but they were not able to take advantage of it. This dangerous guy took the initiative to contact Bullet. New World. A small country. A flash of black light flew high in the sky, and then crashed into the ground madly at an astonishing speed. Boom. The sound of earth-shattering explosion exploded on the shattered ground, and the mighty explosion shockwave set off a high-temperature heat wave, which turned into flames rising into the sky. The black smoke covering the sky and the sun almost enveloped the entire sky, completely shielding the sky, and the entire world seemed to have turned scarlet. On the earth, the mountains and plains are full of messy and broken corpses, the dry blood stains the ground dark red, and the air is full of the smell of war and gunpowder. Ha 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 ha. Let Laozi destroy them all. Only I am the strongest. No matter it is anyone. Anyone can't stop me. The wild and violent laughter came out in the explosion in the sky, revealing a kind of madness and brutality in the exhaustion. A burly blonde figure walked slowly out of the billowing black smoke, and the scarlet-colored eyes were full of crazy killing intent. Douglas Bullet, descendant of the devil. Behind him is a huge steel war machine, countless muzzles protruding from all over the machine, still pouring its terrifying firepower frantically around. The existence of this weapon seems to be just for destruction and killing. Why? Why do you want to do this? We are just a small country, and there is no money in the treasury. A hoarse, weak voice came from the feet. Douglas Bullet paused and frowned impatiently. He looked down and saw a bloody and brutal figure struggling to raise the blood-stained hand, and grabbed his army boots. The man's feet had been completely blown up by the explosion just now, and half of his body was struggling on the ground like a worm, and the upper body was completely buried in the pool of blood created by his own blood, which looked terrifying. His face can no longer see the original appearance. It's just that the dilapidated royal robe on his body can still make people faintly recognize his identity. He is the king of this small country. Died. Are dead, my own people, friends, relatives, citizens. All are dead. And the thousands of troops in his own country, in front of this man, are as vulnerable as ants. Just a punch, the royal city that he was proud of was turned to ashes in an instant and collapsed. He had never thought that his small country of 100,000 people would attract such a powerful pirate to attack. The flames burned his body, and the piercing pain had blurred his consciousness. But he still held on to that army boot tightly, just wanting to know simply. Why? Why? Douglas Bullet glanced at the so-called king with disdain, and the smirk at the corner of his mouth became stronger. War is already commonplace for him, and the devastating scenes in front of him, the scenes of the dead mountains and blood, did not bring him any discomfort, only pleasure. Construction may take a long, long time, but destruction only takes a moment. He, Douglas Bullet, is a soldier, and the only goal of the soldier is destruction. Stupid guy. Do you think I'm here for money? I'm just bored. Ha 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 ha. Bullet's laugh made the king stiff in place. He couldn't believe that one person destroys the most precious possessions of others, just for fun. He could not accept this kind of reason. He clenched the hand subconsciously. Bullet twisted his eyebrows. Remember, only the strong can live, and the weak have no choice even to die. There is. His eyes were cold. You soiled my shoes. Snapped. He suddenly raised his army boots and stepped on it. The king's head was blood plasma that exploded everywhere like a watermelon. At this moment, an unruly and gloomy voice came from the distant horizon. Gee ha ha ha. I didn't expect that on Roger's boat, there would be a little guy with such a cruel tricks. Bullet's face condensed. Next moment, a ray of golden light pierced through the clouds in an instant and whizzed out. Bullet sneered. A layer of strange black shrouded in an instant on his fist, and he punched it hard. Kang. Sparks were splashing in the void, and the ground underneath was like the ocean rising wildly. The collision of the fist in the long sword burst out bright sparks, reflecting the figure of the man in front of him. The golden hair that resembles a lion flutters freely in the strong wind, and the whole body exudes unparalleled haki. Two sharp and boundless long swords entangled with a sharp breath, lying in front of him. Bullet looked at the man in front of him and said with a grin. Golden Lion Shiki. It's been a long time since I saw you. What's wrong? You will come to me without your two legs. Do you want me to abolish your hands? Gia ha ha ha. What a kid who doesn't know the height of the sky. Hearing Douglas Bullet's provocative and ridiculous voice, Golden Lion's cold eyes flashed a stern look and grinned grimly. Even your Captain Roger would not dare to say such things to me. Just relying on a little yellow-haired kid like you. Golden Lion's eyes were cold. Why? Boom. A boundless and majestic aura suddenly exploded from his body, and the violent wind blew up his golden hair to show off and arrogantly. Bullet's face changed slightly, only to feel that the ground under his feet suddenly shook strangely at this moment. His eyes widened suddenly and his pupils contracted tightly. Everything around, yes, all in all. Broken body, flying blood, collapsed houses. The ruined earth. At this moment, they all rose slowly and in terror, and gathered into a huge scarlet lion with a height of hundreds of meters, opening the blood basin and looking down at themselves condescendingly. The thick fangs seemed to tear themselves apart in one bite. And on his fists, those two razor-sharp and infinitely famous knives burst out with terrifying power, causing his figure to retreat involuntarily. Lion Majesty. Earth Coiling. This is one of Golden Lion Shaki Lion Fruit's strongest tricks. The great big pirate back then didn't know that with this trick he set off a monstrous sea lion on the sea, swallowing countless fleets in one go, and buried them completely, deep in the sea. As an old crew member of the Roger Pirates, Douglas Bullet naturally saw the abilities of Golden Lion many times when he followed Roger in the war. But I didn't expect that after 2 years of imprisonment, even after losing his legs, the Golden Lion still possessed the same combat power as before. Boom. Another crushing force surged from the double swords, and the ground under his feet cracked and flew again. Gia ha ha ha. What's the matter, kid? Didn't you say you want to twist Lousy's arm? You are here. Golden Lion was so excited that his face twisted and grinned, as if his expression was slightly twitching and beating because of excessive excitement, and his eyes were stained with murderous scarlet. Bullet roared at this moment, you are nothing but the remnants of the old age. Either you or Captain Roger will be defeated and surpassed by me. Only I, Douglas Bullet, is the strongest person in this sea. He gave a violent shout. Not far away, the steel-filled war fortress seemed to have been summoned by the master, and it uttered an earth-shaking roar and shook wildly. Then, like a fluid, the steel war fortress quickly turned into creeping iron slurry, rushing toward Bullet's body at an alarming speed, like a turbulent black flood. A shadow quickly rose from the ground, and in a blink of an eye a steel giant stood in front of the Golden Lion. Bring it on. Bullet's frantic voice came from the steel giant. Armed color harden. Huh. The mighty armament haki entangled from the giant's arm, wrapping the steel arm into a bright purple cyan. Golden Lion grinned and said, interesting. He brazenly swung his sword. Next moment. Roaring giant, the roaring lion, two behemoths. On this small unknown island of New World, crash. The boundless explosion and firelight suddenly filled the whole world, obstructing all vision. I don't know how long it took. The figures of Bullet and Golden Lion resurfaced in the billowing gunpowder smoke. The former's body was already bruised, full of bloodline, and he was gasping for breath. The Golden Lion floating in midair slowly retracted the two famous swords, Sakura 10, and withered wood, into the scabbard, and sneered. Boy, I won't kill you. Your strength is good, but compared to top masters, there is still a distance. Bullet raised his hand and wiped the blood on the corner of his mouth, and said coldly. Don't kill me. It's a pity, I won't join your subordinates. The Golden Lion suddenly laughed. I know, I didn't think about soliciting you. You can understand that. I can help you improve your combat power. There is only one condition. Join me. Bullet was taken aback. Joining hands? Golden Lion laughed. Yes, join hands. Don't you want to prove that you are stronger than Roger? This is very simple. Think about it. Who arrested Roger? Bullet's pupils flashed violently scarlet. Marine. Golden Lion laughed wildly. Yes, it's Marine. Join me with you. Our goal is to capture naval headquarters. Finished, he waved his hand. Bullet's face changed drastically. I saw the dark clouds in the sky suddenly dispersed. Then it is a densely packed pirate ship floating high in the sky. Capture naval headquarters. The enthusiastic shouts of tens of thousands of people moving mountains and reclaiming the sea came from afar, from the sky full of pirate boats. That is, the old part of the flying pirates. The next day, after finishing the extra training at 4 in the morning, Roy cleaned up the room as always, took a shower, put on a clean military uniform, pushed open the door of the dormitory and stepped into the first ray of sunlight in the morning. On the way to the military school classroom, he noticed something unusual sensitively. The pedestrians hurried on the road, the patrolling soldiers looked solemn, and there was even a dull roar from the port of Marineford in the distance. That was the sound of a warship testing the gun. Did something happen? Roy frowned subconsciously, feeling a little confused for a while. Naval Headquarters Marineford is the most center of justice in the world, and here is the top and most intensive place on the sea. It has the world's most advanced weapons, strong boats and guns, and the largest army. Logically speaking, this is the safest place in the world. And most importantly, based on his familiarity with the plot, after the opening of the Great Pirate Era, Marine did not have a large-scale war broke out in the period between the war on the top 2 decades later. Even if it was the vast and dangerous sea area known as the Pirate Cemetery of New World, they were just trying to make a fuss. But today's weird and depressing atmosphere, Roy really couldn't understand. He shook his head, cleared all the chaotic emotions in his brain, and speeded up his pace subconsciously. No matter what happens, it has nothing to do with him as a freshman in the military academy. Marine Academy is the cradle of the stars. After studying, it will be included in the focus of protection of the military. It does not belong to the order of the regular army, but only symbolically exists as a reserve. This is normal. After all, young people who can qualify to attend military academies have either superior families and noble pedigrees, or good talents and innocent foundations. They are both the focus of future Marine training. Premature death will only waste the training resources of the military. In other words, at least during the period of studying in the military academy, Roy does not need to worry that he will encounter a life-threatening crisis. All he needs to do now is to seize this precious time and improve his strength as much as possible. After being discharged from the hospital, his physical condition has been restored as before. And as designed by the system, after repeated severe injuries and training on the edge of the body, he can clearly feel the speed of his physical improvement, which has been improved. The same quality change. This is an extremely enjoyable process. Even if the speed of progress is not as terrifying as those real geniuses, you can perceive that you are improving and improving every day. Very fulfilling and self-disciplined. The cultivation of 8 inner gates. After he successfully opened the first door to open the door, it was a matter of course. Dripping water through the stone. The truth in the world is often so simple. Roy doesn't know how other people live, he just wants to know how he should live. Everything is changing unconsciously. He doesn't need to make rapid progress himself. He just needs to make a little progress every day. The sand becomes a tower, accumulate less into more. Then, accumulate thin hair. Thinking of this, Roy couldn't help but show a confident smile full of sunshine. He involuntarily quickened his pace, started to run. Things in the surrounding environment are gradually moving away from their body. He runs faster and faster, crystal clear sweat slipped on my ears and on my face. The distant sun gradually rises, higher and higher. The rising sun also dispelled the coldness in the early morning. He rushed forward so hard, the more exaggerated the footsteps. The smile on the corners of the mouth is getting richer and more reckless. No need to look back. Yes, there was a thought in his mind gradually. He will never look back in his life. Run as hard as you can. This is our brilliant and exciting youth. Shouldn't a person's life be so simple? There may only be one time when you need to look back in your life. And that time, just to see how far I have come. He passed rows of patrolling soldiers, he ran through countless military fortresses. He crossed countless forts and railways, still the familiar row of stairs. Still the familiar ground. Finally, he came to the teaching building of the military academy. In front of the teaching building, a towering stone slab stood there. On it are carved a few large characters of dragon and phoenix dancing. To fight for a just cause for life. The inscriber is Zephyr. Roy smiled. He gasped slightly, raising his hands in the air. Some shook his fists in 2 places. The sky has completely lit up. He raised his fists high into the cold sky. Like a lonely and unyielding tiger, life is fighting. Isn't it? You were tired of ordinary life. You hate the unchanging monotony, but what you didn't find was. It turns out that in that bleak daily life, you can actually live as fierce, full of heroism and glory as a war. The life of ordinary people can also be full of enthusiasm. Throw a fist to life. Fight every day. Roy thought so, full of expectation in his heart. At this moment, what are you King kid doing? What about monkey playing? Didn't you know it's time for class? A furious voice rang from behind, and Roy saw only a big fist banging towards him. He flew out suddenly. Today's theory courses are very strange. The speaker is actually Sengoku Admiral. Sengoku has the reputation of the resourceful general in the marine system. He is one of the few senior generals in the army who develops both combat power and strategy. It stands to reason that because of Zephyr's semi-retirement status and Garp's swear to death promotion to Admiral Principal, the military affairs of the three Admiral headquarters have all fallen on Sengoku's shoulders. Under this heavy military affairs, it is impossible for Sengoku to have this time to brag with them in the rookies of the military academy. But today I don't know why, but he is here. Students, what we are going to explain today is the naval battle between naval headquarters in New World in the Flying Pirate Group led by the great pirate, Flying Admiral, Golden Lion Shiki in the Roger era a few years ago. In that battle, the two sides gathered a total of more than 100,000 elites, and the fleet alone exceeded 100. Sengoku Admiral spit on the podium and the stars flew everywhere, with the pointer in his hand. When it comes to excitement, he slammed the pointer hard on the blackboard full of terrain and fleet distribution patterns, making pops sound. This is a classic naval battle. It was written into the textbook by the military academy as a classic case of teaching as early as after Roger was instructed and Golden Lion arrested. In class, everyone, including Roy, was staring at the blackboard intently, listening attentively to the class, taking notes quickly and swiftly in their hands, and did not dare to be distracted at all. Golden Lion Shiki, as you know, he is a big pirate who was as famous as Roger and Whitebeard in the Roger era, and in his hands as the master with a brave large-scale pirate fleet. Of course, this is not the most difficult thing for a marine. The most troublesome aspect of the pirate, Golden Lion, is his strategy, in addition to his own strength. Unlike Roger, a pirate group with only a dozen people on a pirate ship, he is better at commanding a pirate fleet to conduct large-scale raid wars. The naval battle is even more of his usual trick. The lion fruit he owns can lift all his fleet to the sky and achieve a large-scale high-speed movement in military strategy, which is impossible to guard against. In that battle, our marine suffered such a loss from the beginning, and suffered a lot of battle losses. As Sengoku talked about the war that year in a vivid and colorful manner, the students in the audience were fascinated by their words, and their expressions were passionate and excited, as if the magnificent scenes of the war had already appeared in front of them. The gunpowder is full of smoke, there are countless enemies in front of you. Surrounded by a rain of bullets, at the foot is the body of a comrade in arms. Strong sense of substitution, they have already gritted their teeth and were eager to try. The most important is, this is not a fictional case, but a real cruel war that broke out a few years ago. In the end, Marine lost more than 10,000 elite and damaged more than 20 advanced warships before reluctantly winning the war. Unfortunately, in that war, they did not arrest Golden Lion Shiki. This is the cruelty of war, snapped. The more Sengoku talked, the more excited he got, and suddenly his eyes were flushed and he threw the pointer in his hand onto the podium, splashing with bursts of chalk dust. Although you are military academy students, one day you will be on the battlefield. At that time, you will also face such a powerful opponent. The freshmen were also excited and indignant. Because of personal experience, Sengoku almost unreservedly showed the scene of that war in front of everyone. It seems to have traveled through time, bringing them all back to the battlefield of blood and fire. Corpses and blood, knives and guns, screaming and shouting. Marine's horn neighed, the pirate is grinning. In the audience, all the freshmen including Roy were dumbfounded, their fists clenched involuntarily. Well, today our course is here. You need to write an analysis of military strategy based on today's teaching case, and hand it to the instructor tomorrow. After Sengoku finished speaking, he strode out of the classroom. However, what no one noticed is that the moment he walked out of the classroom door, he suddenly sighed. How much do they understand? Outside the classroom, Zephyr held his chest with both hands and said to Sengoku solemnly. Sengoku shook his head and smiled bitterly. When we were their age, where did we think so much? Zephyr fell silent for a moment. Yes, the war is coming. Although I don't know exactly when, however, there has been news from New World that Golden Lion and Bullet have joined forces and are gathering troops in a frenzy. Sengoku and Zephyr knew that they would come. Will definitely come. They are not afraid of war. What they fear is, when the Golden Lion led the invincible fleet and descended to Marineford in the sky. How much can the freshmen of this military academy survive in the end? Thinking of the day when the pirate regiment flew over the sky and covered the sun, Marineford, the holy land of justice, both Sengoku and Zephyr fell into a bottomless silence. Unlike other troops on the right track in this department, the freshmen here are all stunned recruits who have never been on the battlefield. No, let alone on the battlefield, even many of them have never seen dead people and corpses in their entire lives. War is cruel, and Golden Lion is a pirate who wants to reach his goal by all means. He would not have any pity for these immature freshmen in the military academy. On the contrary, he might even drop part of the pirate fleet directly into the military academy to delay and divide the combat power of the headquarters. Is the news confirmed? The Golden Lion guy has joined Douglas Bullet. Zephyr twisted his hands holding his chest, raised his head and said in a deep voice. His vicissitudes of life went straight over Sengoku in front of him, and he looked at the students playing around with each other through the glass windows of the classroom, and his mood was extremely heavy. They are just a bunch of children. Even if he is an adult, but in Zephyr's heart, those who have not experienced the real baptism of war are all children. Hearing Zephyr's question, Sengoku's face was stained with haze. He subconsciously supported the frame of his glasses and nodded solemnly. Yes, the news has been confirmed. Golden Lion conquered Douglas Bullet with powerful combat power and instigated the alliance between them. The flower country of Sakura in New World has been completely destroyed. Bullet has slaughtered all the 100,000 citizens of the entire country with one person. Having said that, Sengoku's teeth couldn't help but clenched very tightly, making a crisp sound, as if trying to suppress his inner anger. 100,000 weak and small civilians were all massacred overnight, which undoubtedly means Marine's incompetence. But the sea area of New World is a place where justice still has not been able to set foot. It is very angry, but Sengoku can't help it. Zephyr frowned and said, but according to our intelligence analysis, Douglas Bullet is not a person who likes to ally and cooperate with others. The Roger Pirates are Marine's old opponents. Many times of encirclement and suppression, the senior naval headquarters are very familiar with the members of the Roger Pirates and the old department. Sengoku smiled bitterly, because Roger. He sighed. Bullet wants to prove that he is stronger than Roger, while Golden Lion wants to seek revenge from Marine. It's estimated that Golden Lion motivated Bullet to cooperate with him on the basis that we Marine arrested Roger and executed him publicly. As long as we defeat our naval headquarters, Bullet will naturally be able to prove to the whole world that he has done something that even Pirate King Roger can't do. These two lunatics. Zephyr swore directly. Douglas Bullet and Golden Lion Shiki, he and Sengoku have both played against them. Needless to say, Golden Lion, but Bullet is also a terribly strong monster. At only 22 years old, his strength has infinitely approached the strength of the Admiral class. This kind of talent is far more terrifying than the three of Akainu, Kizaru and Aokiji. After the Roger Pirates was disbanded, Marine has always wanted to find a way to arrest this guy. However, Bullet was acting alone and his traces were elusive, which made the arrest operation impossible. It is conceivable that if you just let it go, it will not be long before Bullet will definitely become one of the strongest group of people in this sea. New World has sent news that Golden Lion has reorganized the Flying Pirates and has recruited a large number of people based on the original unit. Sengoku slowly said, the entire New World underground world was sold out by him almost overnight. With his reputation, it is definitely not a problem. Now several large pirate groups in New World, including Big Mom Charlotte Linlin and Whitebeard, have taken a cold eye on the crazy behavior of Golden Lion, and they have not stopped the slightest. Perhaps, they are also quietly waiting for the Golden Lion to attack Marineford again. Yes. This is not the first time Golden Lion has scored Marineford. This island, known as the Holy Land of Justice, was mostly destroyed by the single-handed Golden Lion 2 years ago. It is hard to imagine that if the disaster of that day strikes again, this time the Golden Lion, who is prepared to bring his own fleet, will cause a terrible nightmare to this peaceful place. But then again, Zephyr, do you want to tell these little bunnies? Sengoku suddenly asked Zephyr, and the corner of his mouth turned towards the classroom behind him. Zephyr pondered for a moment, looked at the young faces in the classroom, and slowly said, if it doesn't happen, let's not talk about it for the time being, just do some preparatory work first. He was afraid that this group of recruits would be directly scared. Roy, what do you think Zephyr and Sengoku Admiral are talking about sneakily outside? After class, Roy was sullenly sorting out the class notes he had just recorded in the class, but suddenly a head came up next to him, and his big eyes looked straight at himself and asked. Roy was depressed when he was interrupted. I just immersed myself, wanting to try to compare the military strategy of this pirate world with those military strategies on the earth of my native world, but this idea was abruptly interrupted by the chick Hina. He sighed and said helplessly, Student Hina, you are preventing me from studying. Hina was stunned, and she thought that you idiot knows how to study and train all day long. What else can you do besides these? She curled her lips and said, Isn't this just the end of Get Out of Class? What are you writing? By speaking, she moved her gaze to the notebook in Roy's hand, but soon she looked at Roy again, full of question marks. What is written in this? Siege. On protracted war. Strategy behind enemy lines. There is also this war is another continuation of politics. A single spark can start a prairie fire. Soldiers, national events, places of death and life. The way of survival and death must be observed. All of them are themselves sentences that are completely incomprehensible. She stared at her beautiful eyes, her long eyelashes staring at Roy puffing, her eyes full of curiosity and admiration. Roy shook his head and said flatly, Just write it casually. To be honest, he did not have a deep understanding of war theory. The biggest cognition is just a few must-reads for my politics class on the earth. If it weren't for the bald political uncle teacher who insisted on writing a reading note and thoughts, to be honest, with his inertia, it would be impossible to read those books patiently. But now it seems, those things and knowledge that I thought were useless in the past have now glowed with a whole new brilliance. The most important thing is that after a clear comparison, Roy has thoroughly realized how backward the pirate world's war theory is. But this is also normal. The most mainstream and common mode of warfare in this world is naval warfare. The basic routine is very simple, especially on the marine side, which is to sink the enemy's warship as much as possible with strong firepower, and then approach the ship to start the battle. There is no doubt that the crudeness of this mode of warfare is obvious. Hina heard Roy's perfunctory remarks and flipped a Byakugan. She looked at Roy's face that had gradually become resolute due to training and hard work, and suddenly gritted her teeth. Student Roy, we haven't studied together this evening. As she spoke, her cheeks were stained with blush. Roy scratched his head and said, Isn't I in the hospital these days? Hina bit her red lips with her teeth, her voice suddenly lowered like a mosquito. Don't you like me anymore, like Momoshiki Vice Admiral? Huh. Roy was dumbfounded. What question are you asking? When did I like you? He looked at Hina's beautiful face and hesitated. That Hina classmate, I didn't like Momoshiki Vice Admiral. He was telling the truth. Before Hina could react, he looked out the window and saw Zephyr and Sengoku look worried, and there was a flash of anxiety in his heart. There is always something wrong. Today's Sengoku Admiral's unexpected theory class. The various depressive atmospheres and apparently unusual military mobilizations in the headquarters. And Teacher Zephyr's face. Roy couldn't help but think of a name. The man who once rushed into naval headquarters single-handedly with 2 swords in his hands. Is he just going out of prison to start a war again? It doesn't make sense. With my familiarity with the plot, shouldn't the bald cock go to Whitebeard's boat to load up a wave, and then dormant for 20 years and run to Luffy to send people away? Roy muttered in his heart. He shook his head and said to Hina. I don't know, maybe something happened in military affairs. Hina frowned and quickly loosened her willow eyebrows. That's right, there is probably nothing in this world that will annoy them, right? Roy thought the young man was so naive, at this moment. Zephyr's figure appeared at the door of the classroom. I saw him slowly stepping onto the podium, clapping his hands to attract the attention of the freshmen, and said loudly. Well, bastards, the next class is a training class. This training class will be taught by the old man himself, explaining the essentials and introduction of Marine 6 styles. The moment the voice fell, the whole classroom suddenly exploded with surprised cheers. Only Roy shook his heart suddenly. Something definitely happened. Marine 6 styles. This is still early in the military academy's teaching plan.